Garry, thanks for making time to talk to me about the whole issue of responsible tourism as we turn from 2021 into 2022. I'm really interested to hear how you see it now that you've moved from TUI to easyJet. You're setting up a whole new set of holidays. You're CEO of Responsible Holidays at easyJet. I think this is really exciting because I don't think we're going to change the travel and tourism industry without changing volume tourism, and I'm really keen to hear where your thinking is now on that.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Harold. It's great to see you and join you again. I mean, as you know, I've been quite passionate about responsible tourism and sustainability for a number of years, and I think that, you know, the opportunity to go in and set up and lead a business that's going to be a scale player with nothing that's gone before from a sustainability and responsibility point of view is a phenomenal opportunity, because what it means is we don't need to retrofit a load of policies into things that are going to then cost us money or change processes or change business models. We can set it up from the beginning, and that was something that really attracted me to get into easyJet Holidays. And you know, if you think of the scale and size of the airline with, you know, pre-pandemic nearly 100 million passengers, you know, the ability to be able to scale a business that can make a difference at a macro level and at a sector level, I think is phenomenal. And that was something that, you know, we thought long and hard about, both, you know, before we launched the business, but also at the launch of the business, in order that when we were to go out with our sustainability strategy, it was something, firstly, we knew we could stand by, you know, because we didn't have anything in place that, you know, we needed to kind of change or take apart. But secondly, it was a strategy that we knew would be scalable. So in our first year, when we've got nearly 1 million customers, and then we go to 2 into 3 into 4 million customers, you know, are these policies scalable? Because what I don't want to do is end up, you know, with a section of my business or a section of subsector of the customers that we have who are contributing and actually everyone else isn't. I want it to be across all of the things that we do. And that was why it was really important, you know, when we launched that we took that into account.
So I can well see why you were tempted to do that, Garry. It's an incredible opportunity. But what I'm hearing you say is that we're not going to change travel and tourism from the bottom up with the small guys. We've really got to change the volume tourism dimension. And I think that's increasingly obvious that when we look at the scale of the problems that we confront with the environment, with poverty, with carbon. Is that what's driving you?
You know what, I mean, it's a really good point. And I think that, you know, there is a place, you know, to talk about, you know, very, very focused niche activity, you know, within the space. But I don't believe at a macro or a sector or a scale or an international level, you know, that momentum is going to need to be 1,000, 10,000 fold in order to exact any great difference. And I think one thing, you know, that's really come out of the last few years with the debate and the discussions on carbon, on climate change and everything else, is it's very obvious that you know, whilst people on the ground, whilst consumers and whilst businesses need to be doing what they can, actually it's the key industry players, it's the key infrastructure players, it's the key government players that need to be making the difference. And if I think about, you know, if you think about the carbon debate and discussion around aviation, you know, yes, we've gone out and we've offset our carbon, you know, on all of the flights that we take, but we are fully cognizant of the fact that, you know, this is a bridge to something that needs to come, and something that needs to come quickly. And, you know, as a business, you know, the business case is clear. If you don't sort this out, people aren't going to get on your planes, you know, and therefore you need to really think about, you know, carbon in the context of consumer demand, in the context of government policy and international policy. And I think that's why when you get at that very top level, it's really important that back to things like aircraft manufacturers, engineers of aircraft, designers of engines, they need to start thinking about this stuff. Because, you know, the way you would design an engine, the way you would engineer an engine, the way you would use the infrastructure that governments internationally are putting in place in order to get to hydrogen quicker, that's how you're going to get there. And I think that, you know, we can talk a lot about hydrogen and everyone is focused on hydrogen for aircraft, but it also needs the government to stand up and put, you know, large investment into infrastructure in order to get there. So there's huge amount of taxes collected for APD and environmental taxes that needs to be invested in proper long-term infrastructure that's going to get us on that path to sustainability.
One of the things I think, Gary, is different about your approach to this is when you talk about the bridge, you mean a short bridge, don't you? And
Yeah,
I hear
absolutely.
other people talk about SAF and the bridge and how we can't do it. So the British government comes out, what was it, yesterday or the day before, and they're very proud of the fact by 2035, aviation in the UK will be powered 10% by SAF. Well, so what? Frankly, that isn't anywhere matching what needs to be done. And I know that easyJet has been talking with Airbus about hydrogen powered flight, and it isn't there tomorrow. But unless people talk about it and plan for that to happen, and as you say, challenge the engineers to deliver, then it won't happen, will it?
And you're absolutely right. I mean, if the technology is there, if the ability to be able to power flight through hydrogen is there, then why would you be saying, oh, let's do it at 10% or 5% or whatever? I mean, interestingly, when we saw COVID, when COVID struck, literally the world's fleet of 747s were floating to the desert and locked up. That would never have happened in a space of 3 or 6 months otherwise. So the industry can change its model and change its focus very quickly if it needs to. And I think that, 2035 isn't that far off. 2030 is not that far off. And we need to have a proper roadmap that gets us to, how we're going to get to a position where it becomes the norm that, that hydrogen is, the norm in terms of flying, and that, getting to a net zero carbon position is the norm. And by setting very, very, by setting very far off and low targets, does that help? No, I don't think it does help. But I think what it does help with is then not having to really put your back as a government into proper investment in proper infrastructure that says, this is where we're getting to. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to put as much weight behind this as the companies are going to put behind it, as the engineers are going to put behind it, as the airline manufacturers are going to put behind it, and everyone works towards that. And I think that kind of conjoint approach, where it's at the highest level from a policy position, that's where you'll get there.
One of the things which has always struck me right since I did that original work for DFID in 94, 97, is that there aren't any eco-tourists there are very few eco-tourists who don't get there by flying. And we're not going to change the way flying works in aviation other than by the big operators getting involved. And the problem is not aviation, the problem is the fuel that they use. It ought to be a relatively simple thing. But whilst people procrastinate, then we don't make the progress.
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, the explanation of it is very simple. You move to hydrogen. That's the solution. That's the answer. Now, everyone who has a part to play to get there needs to then put the cards on the table and say, right, this is the part that we're going to play. This is how we're going to lead into this. Because if you think of the size, both from a number of customers and a number of people that it impacts, but also in terms of just kind of economically and financially, that the size of the aviation industry and the travel sector, it is enormous, and it's enormous enough that, at a very high government level internationally, all of the big power players need to have a very, very clear strategy, but not just saying, this is where we want you to get by this point. It's saying, this is where we collectively need to get to, and this is how we collectively are going to get there.
One of the things I've been excited by in the last year is discovering Sea Fuel, this project which is working on Tenerife, generating hydrogen from seawater using just electricity in order to power hire cars. I think it's really exciting, and it made me start to think about the Gambia, because there it sits on the coast. It has plenty of sunshine. It's the one thing that country has in spades, that you could actually envisage, perhaps not in my lifetime, but certainly fairly soon, the Gambia actually generating the hydrogen fuel there for the aircraft and selling it to the airlines, rather than having to import it into the Gambia to then sell it to the airlines. That would be a real game changer in terms of the economic impact of tourism internationally. That's a big prize, I think.
I think that's it. And I mean, it's interesting because there are so many of these initiatives taking place in so many different places that, the collective brain power is there, the collective thought is there. How do you take that and scale that to to a sector level, you know, to a scaled sector level. And I think the point about someone like the Gambia is really interesting, because of course these options from a sustainability perspective, you know, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's solar, you know, there's lots of different options. Suddenly these countries, you know, have got a roadmap out of their place in terms of, you know, their kind of economic position as nations. And I think that's really quite exciting, and that's something that, you know, using the natural resource to get to where you want to get to is phenomenal. And I know that when I've looked at some of the stuff that Morocco's done on solar, I mean, it's phenomenal that you can, you know, you can power huge swathes of the country and cities and huge populations, you know, using what you've naturally got. I mean, that's really quite exciting.
And hopefully export it back to us as well, because we're going to need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gary, can we just come back to your new holidays program, because you launched it what, 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
It's obviously just the first iteration of it.
Yes.
Do you want to just say something about where you've got and where you're going?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's something that we've talked about for a while, I know, and actually when I look at the structure of it, it's an interesting one, because what we're trying to do, I think one of the things at the moment that characterizes responsible travel or sustainability within travel is it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And even when we talk about things like carbon offset, customers, you know, it's not universally or clearly understood what this means and what the approach should be. So what we really wanted to do within holidays, in the same way as within the airline, is to try to be as simple as we can in terms of how we explain this to customers, but actually say the responsibility is sitting with us. You know, we're going to take this on board, but we're going to be able to articulate and explain what we're doing. So for us, it's very much a case of, you know, we know what the airline's doing. There's a very clear roadmap in terms of the airline's, you know, journey to hydrogen and journey to get to, you know, carbon net zero. I think that from a holidays perspective, what's really important for us is to say, once you get to the destination, you know, how can we ensure that the choices that you're making are the best choices from a responsibility perspective? And that would be things, you know, yes, we can do things like have a program where we have a kind of green leaf for every 1 in 20 hotels, or we can say, you know what, the business case on this is clear. And this is the really exciting thing for me. The business case now at tourist board level is clear. You know, when I see some of the great work that places like Calvi have done, or some other destinations that have tried to kind of regenerate in the last kind of 20 years, they understand it. They understand that, you know, by having specific policy in place for how wastewater is used, or just having water policy, waste policy, you know, energy policy, social policy for how they employ people, the policy on how they would source their food and how they would work with, you know, local co-ops in order to be able to do that. You know, that to me is really quite exciting, because then you're working in partnership with a lot of these tourist destinations, and that's cascading down to the big hotels in terms of what their policies look like. So really what we wanted to do from a destination level was to be able to set out, you know, there's a number of, and we've not actually talked about initiatives, but we've talked about the ambition to say we want to work at government level in order to look at initiatives which are going to change things at a macro level and at the level of, you know, the destinations, and then we can work down on initiatives that are going to kind of help that and going to allow that to get to its place. Then in terms of within the hotels themselves, you know, we've gone for GSTC certification, and that's really just looking at, you know, what is the policy environmentally, socially, economically, that's going to really, you know, get behind responsible tourism, embrace the principles, in order that your business, you know, becomes more economically sustainable, because you're doing the right things environmentally and socially for the people that are then visiting, and then using that to have the conversation with customers. And I don't want to say to educate customers, because I think customers are able to educate themselves, but really just to have that transparency for them, that they understand what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it.
I think that transparency word, Gary, is actually at the heart of all of this, because as you know, certification for me is, there's always been the problem, it's not exactly transparent. What's excited me recently was seeing what Google have done, and there'll be lots of people who say they haven't got it quite right, but that's a really transformational thing. I mean, I looked at just 2 before I blogged about it last week, and in both cases, the most carbon efficient and the cheapest flight in their system was exactly the same flight. And I think people are going to start to notice that. And the other one is what Booking.com are just about to come out with, which is they're going to make sure that it's the hotel who's telling you what it is they're doing. So that becomes then part of your contract with the hotel, which means that then becomes enforceable. And if they're not doing what they say they're doing, you've got some chance of getting recompense for that. What it seems to be you're doing is even more exciting, because you're doing what the supermarkets have done. You're saying it's up to us to construct the responsible product that we know the consumer wants to buy, and we'll take responsibility for doing that. That's what Sainsbury's and Tesco and all the others are doing. Now, I'm sure you'll do it better than them, but the principle is the same, isn't it? That actually you're delivering what the consumer wants and taking the burden of sorting that out off their shoulders, but providing it for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the industry long enough to see, you know, the very, you know, the very small shoots of sustainability and responsible tourism when they, you know, when it was first talked about, you know, in terms of being important and going to be important for the future, to the position that we've got to now. And, you know, for people not involved directly in it, I think they would be surprised and probably shocked at the multi-million and probably billion-pound industry that has sprouted up in order to support this. And I think certification, as you say, is an interesting one, because, you know, there are more organizations and bodies who offer certification programs than you could shake a stick at, you know, and all of them have very different approaches, or some have different approaches. And you know, for consumers, it's just a myriad, you know. They say, well, I thought that I was doing the right thing. You know, it was interesting. And it was, I don't know if you saw that show, I think it was on Netflix, about, you know, the kind of the fishing industry.
Yes.
And about, you know, it's just really interesting when they looked at that certification piece. And I think, you know, this is what we're facing. And, you know, consumers think they're doing the right thing, but they don't have the resource available in order to really get to the bottom of understanding what that means. And I think we, as large organizations, we should have that resource. And we certainly have the technology to be able to, you know, be robust in how we're approaching this stuff. And therefore, the customers need to think, if I go with that brand, I know that they've done a lot of that due diligence and a lot of that work for me. And I know that actually that's meeting the criteria that I would set myself in terms of getting there. I think one of the challenges with putting it down, say, to a single hotel level or a single individual level, is that, you know, there is an assumption that myriad of organizations and businesses that actually support this whole sector, you know, there's an understanding of the differences between them, and there simply isn't an understanding.
There is. No, I think the Google thing and the Booking.com, which is going to launch later in November, I think will be real game changers for people wanting to travel in their own right. And of course, that would be a great educator for people who will, well, I don't want to go to all that work, but I still want this. And they're going to look to those big operations which can offer them as clean a holiday as they can expect to get in the current technology.
And you know what, both of them, I mean, the really exciting thing about both that is technology, is how you can harness technology now in order to really help inform decisions. And then really, and that technology is scalable with no limit. You know, that can just go on and on and on. So actually, the ability to get there quicker has never been greater at this point, and that's very much due to technology.
Yes, it is. And in a way, we're using technology, Gary, just to end with a bit of a plug for us, I guess. We've set up this platform for change to try and help people to see where exciting things have been done. So I think, for example, the one that always comes to mind is Lemon Tree Hotels in India. 20% of their staff now are either scheduled cast or people with serious disabilities, including victims of acid attack, and they've managed to get to a point where 20% of their employees come from those categories. That's outstanding in anybody's terms, and to have that material available so that other people could try to emulate it. They probably won't get to 20%, but my goodness, if they got to 5%, it would make a big difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I know some years back we went to India where we looked at a number of these hotels, and I think it was an award ceremony that we went to for a number of these hotels, and it fascinated me that, you know, the small steps at a sector level, but enormous steps at an individual level that these people are making in order to make a difference, and in order to ensure that the long-term sustainability of, you know, the operation and of tourism, I just thought was mind-blowing. And I think the fact that you can actually take that and put that on a platform to show to people across the world is phenomenal, because people would never find that out otherwise.
No.
And I think being able to talk to them and show them that sort of thing is great. And I think, you know, more power to it, because the more platforms we've got that people can go and learn and think about that stuff, the better.
One of the things that's really interesting for me, Garry, is that I've never yet come across somebody who's found a solution, made it work, who isn't willing to share it.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the motivation is of wanting to share it so that more people will do it. There is a first mover advantage perhaps, but the real pleasure comes when you see other people emulating you. And
I think you're right, and I think you know as well. We've all got to a position. We're all in a position from a tour operating and travel point of view that we've realised just how, you know, how finite the resources are, but also, you know, how delicate it is when those things run out of sync, as we've seen with the pandemic.
Yes.
And I think that we're all very clear that we need to get to a position as an industry whereby we're all behind this and we're all able to talk comprehensively about it and give these solutions to customers, both from a supply point of view, from the destinations themselves who are delivering the product, but also from the tour operators who are selling the product as well. And I think that's brilliant that, as you say, there is absolute, or there seems to be significantly more alignment than there's been before, and we just need to continue in that path.
Yes, I can tell you, without giving anything away, that there's some amazing things coming through in the awards again this year. And you know, that's the main way at the moment we find the examples, but I'm hoping that once we set the platform off, many people involved in travel and tourism will send us other examples that we should put on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
In order that they can be shared. Garry, thank you very much for your time today. That's really appreciated. I enjoyed it enormously, and I look forward to seeing the developments as your work at easyJet rolls on.
I did too. Thanks, Harold, and have a great WTM.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.